G'day, Ben Kingsley here, the Managing Director of Empower Wealth, and obviously each month we spend a lot of time looking after lots and lots of customers. So I wanted to basically start to do a monthly wrap in our property side of our business. I wanted to get also in behind those numbers and tell the real life stories that are going on for each of our customers. So I've got a list of customers here, a handful of customers that I've been given by each of the advisors, and I want to tell a little bit of their story. First of all, I want to start with the actual numbers. So inside our property wealth planning team, we delivered 40 new property plans. So that's 40 new clients in July that we're going to be looking after. Now, what's interesting about the numbers inside that, over the next 12 months, we're going to be buying 32 properties. Now, to the value of around $17.3 million. So that's pretty cool. But if we actually have a look at those 40 plans that we're doing, we do portfolio plans as well. So there can be multiple recommendations around those properties as well. So here's some of the numbers. Of those 40 plans that we put in play that came live in July, we're going to buy 128 properties, and that's to the value of $58.2 million. Now, if we think about that, obviously we're going to see some growth in that number story over time. But also, property is about building that passive income. So a little sort of number that I put together as well is, what if we got a 4% rental income from that 58.2 million? That equates to $2.382 million every year that's being generated in passive income for those clients. So that's the numbers part of the story. But now I want to move into those real life examples. So here's one that I spoke to with Brendan about. They're a Melbourne-based couple in their mid-40s, middle-class couple with two older kids. Now, up until this point in time, they've basically bought their principal home, they've got a small mortgage attached to that, and they've been enjoying their money. They've been enjoying living comfortably around that money. Now, what has changed their focus right now around their future financial situation has been their youngest son. Now, he apparently is a pretty good basketball player. So for him to get an opportunity, they potentially need to move to Brisbane. So when you're moving to Brisbane, to give him the better opportunities, that's going to change your results around your household. So what do we do with the Melbourne property? Do we keep it? Do we sell it? What about when we move to Brisbane? Do we buy in Brisbane? Do we rent? What's next in terms of our overall plan? So that was the challenge that Brendan had in terms of sitting down with his couple and trying to work out that future plans. So the conclusion of that is we have a plan now where we're going to keep Melbourne and turn it into an investment property. We're going to buy a new principal place of residence in Brisbane, in the school zone that we need to be in for that son to get the best basketball opportunities. So we've woven that in terms of we're going to then buy another investment property. And then in 5 to 6 years after the son is no longer a dependent child, so he's all grown up now, we're going to turn that Brisbane property also into an investment property. And we're going to go and retire on the Gold Coast. And so we need to buy a principal place of residence on the Gold Coast. And so we turn that Brisbane property again into an investment property. So at the age of 65, this couple out of Melbourne have had a big transformation around their move. They've obviously been able to make some of these decisions based on the calculations that we've been able to give them to say what is actually going to turn out. So for me, the problems that we've solved and the transformation that they're having is, can they do it? Yes, they can. How do they do it best? Well, they just follow the script. We've now got a plan for them. They also, as we heard earlier, were pretty easygoing with their money, and that meant that they weren't trapping enough of it. So we've implemented the money smarts, so that free and easy money is now focused on the future plans that we're looking for that client. So they now have a clear clarity and direction in terms of how they're going to move forward. But most of all, from my point of view, they've now got the confidence to act. So that's a great news story for Brendan in terms of putting that plan together. So one of Joel's clients this month was a Tassie-based couple in their early 30s. They've got no kids and they have no plans of having more children. They're currently in the retail and government sectors, so they're on a middle-class income. Now, they own the principal place of residence in Hobart. They've actually done pretty well. They timed getting into that market all right, so they've done all right. They also hold one investment property in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, and one of those people has a third share in a property with his sisters that he also rents to the parents. So the mum lives in that property. So it's a bit of a family affair, that one. So he's got a bit of a joint venture going on there. Now, in terms of what was their motivation to come and seek Joel's advice, this is an interesting story. Now, they're looking to move away from Tassie. They're actually looking to also relocate, similar to Brendan's story, where we've got better jobs and the weather in Tassie has finally got to them. So they're planning to make a move to sunny Western Australia and move to Perth. So part of their discussion points around this is they were indecisive. They had differing opinions around what the best strategy was to move forward. They had multiple scenarios running through their heads, and that was always challenging for them. And the other bit that was also challenging was this third ownership, because that third ownership also did mean that they had, multiple responsibilities around servicing, so joint and several liabilities around the debts on that particular property that the mother lives in as well. So no real clarity, lots of ideas, but no real clarity around their situation. So the solution that we proposed to them based on sitting down, and Joel had several different conversations with them because there was lots of moving parts to this story. So the first one was, we are now going to renovate Hobart. Okay, so we're going to take advantage of a very strong market in Hobart, do some tidy up on that property, and then we're going to sell that property at the peak. So that's going to be able to allow us to gain some further cash. We're moving to Perth, and we're going to rent for the first 6 months and check out how it's sort of the life moves around the Perth market. Then our plan is to buy our entry-level property into the Perth market whilst it's soft. It's a softer market over there, so that gives us an opportunity to come into that market. Now, down the track, we do plan to upgrade that property. So as we get our better jobs, our careers start to move forward, we're going to look to potentially upgrade that property. So after they upgrade that property, that principal home, they then go on to buy their third and fourth investment properties, and they're looking to retire in their mid-60s with a passive income of around $100,000. So that's a great story. And for me, what I love about this one is they firstly had some ideas around what was right and what was wrong, and they had mixed opinions about those. So we've been able to clarify those opinions, and we've been able to go on and renovate that Hobart property. So they're doing that right now. Their plans are in foot to move to Perth in the next 6 months, and overall now they have the confidence to act on their overall situation. So for me, that's another great reason why you get behind the numbers and you can see exactly what it means for each household and why it's so rewarding for us to be in a position to be able to facilitate this. I then want to talk to you about Damien's stories. So Damien and I spoke about an interesting couple in their mid-30s who live in regional New South Wales. I love this story because they're both registered nurses. They've got 3 kids aged 13, 2 and 3 months, so a very, very newborn child. They're currently living in coastal New South Wales, but they've also got 1 investment property in inland New South Wales as well. So they sought some help and some guidance around what their next steps were. And their big rocks in the jar, one of their very big rocks in the jar was a working holiday. And they wanted to be able to go away. Obviously, as registered nurses, they're in high demand anywhere in Australia and also around the world. So they had this plan to go away and spend some time and travel with their family. So rather than waiting to retirement, they wanted to do that early. So what happened here was we were able to model that in 2023, that they would be able to go away and do that working holiday. There are other big challenges around that working holidays. Do they get an investment property now before they go? Do they want another principal place of residence later on? Yes, that was in their thinking. Okay, what do they do with their Bathurst property? So should they hold it or sell it? And ultimately they also cared about what was going to happen with their parents as they got older. So their parents weren't in any financial difficulty, but obviously as they get older, there's going to need to be some planning around their parents' situation. So they were really thinking about that as part of, the reasons why they wanted to sit down and get some clarity around their situation. So what was the result? And I reckon this is a great result. So firstly, we're going to hold the Bathurst property. It seems to be carrying itself. Bathurst is one of those bigger inland central areas of New South Wales with diversified economy, so that one's a hold. In terms of, yes, we could sneak in an investment property right now based on their current situation for around $550,000 before they embarked on that working holiday. They then can afford into the future a principal place of residence in a coastal community in New South Wales as well. So overall for this couple, we've got 4 investment properties plus a new principal place of residence. They're going to make sure that they keep on top of their money using Money Smarts. So they're going to implement the Money Smart system, and effectively they're going to fund their retirement in their mid-50s, and it's a comfortable retirement that they're chasing. So we're looking around that sort of $70,000 per annum. So the takeaways for me with this particular couple, one, I think they're doing a great job and getting around in the community nursing work and the registered nurses that they are. I think that's amazing. But the takeaways for me is they can now start getting excited about buying that second investment property. They can start to see what that's going to do for their financial situation. But they can also get really excited and start planning for that working holiday that is going to come up pretty quick for them, especially with 3 young children. So there's plenty of planning that they're going to need to do. So that for me is real value in being able to see exactly how we can help them on their journey. Rachel had a lovely story out of Sydney to tell about a couple who are a professional couple in their early 40s with 2 young children. One a lawyer and the other one is also in IT. Now she's a part-time lawyer, but they have got very solid savings, and they're currently happily renting in the Sydney market in an area that they've enjoyed living in, and they want to stay in that area because they think their children are going to get the best opportunity in that area. Now this is an Irish couple, and recently their backstory was that they decided to move back to Ireland. Now when they moved back to Ireland, they lasted 6 months before they worked out, no, this is not the right decision. We're coming back to Australia. We've now made a confident decision around that. So now we need to get serious about providing for our financial future. So I thought that was really interesting. So some of their big ticket items that they wanted to focus in on, ultimately they do want their own principal place of residence, even though they're renting now. They obviously want to provide for their family, so things like the children's education, the Catholic education is going to be important for them. They don't want to stretch themselves, so they haven't gone super aggressive in their plan. They want to be able to live now, but also build out wealth over time. And obviously having Irish connections, they're going to be doing lots of visiting friends and relatives and potentially hosting people back here in Australia. So that was quite an interesting brief, but I think Rach did a great job in solving it. So here's what the plan is. The first part of the plan is we're going to buy a $1 million investment property, but that investment property is going to turn into their principal home once the kids are old enough and they leave the nest. So we're getting that good value asset in a good location in Sydney, and ultimately will be their principal home, but it's going to be an investment property to start up with. In addition to that property, when cash flows have allowed, we've now gone and planned for 3 further investment properties over the course of the next 10 years. So that will then allow us to then build out that investment portfolio before we start retiring the debt. Now to retire the debt, there is a focus on the Money Smart solution, which is about helping them manage their money better to be able to retire that debt. So quite a comfortable plan for this couple out of Sydney. Lovely couple to deal with, I've been told from Rachel. So a really pleasing story. And for me, the transformation that's going on for this couple is, they've had a bit of uncertainty in their life, moving quickly into Ireland, giving that a go, and then working out, no, it wasn't for them. They've made a mistake, reversing that situation, coming back into Australia. They now have, solidified that position, and now they've got a roadmap. So they've made a commitment that this is their long-term story, and now they've got a financial roadmap that's going to help them on that journey. So I really like that. In terms of their self-funding retirement, they're targeting around their mid-60s, obviously early 40s with young children, so they need a little bit more time, and they're targeting $100,000 passive income for them to enjoy in retirement. So another great story for one of Rachel's clients. I'm really pleased to be sharing that one now. In sitting down with Paul, I got to learn about a Melbourne couple, one of the couples that he looked after this last month. And they're on moderate incomes. They're living a comfortable lifestyle. They've got a principal place of residence in Melbourne. And they're also currently building a property just up the road as their first investment property in a neighbouring suburb. So we believe they'll do quite well out of that. So well done in terms of getting on that pathway already. Now, the motivations to come and speak with us, there's a lot going on in this couple's lives. They're actually not married yet. So the first big rock in the jar is they're going to have a wedding. get married, and then they're going to be planning for that family. So they wanted to come in and look over the plan around that family story in terms of what it looks like. But in addition to that, they had this itch that they needed to scratch around potentially moving closer in. So they wanted to move closer to the CBD, which would have meant a really higher price point. And how would that impact their, number one, living, number two, having a family, all of those things. So they needed to solve that problem. And that's why they were motivated to come in and have a conversation with us. And as they went through that, they went on the discovery of trying to work out exactly what came about. And in this case, here's what the story was. So the story was we could potentially move them closer in and get a higher price property closer to the city. But the challenge with that is that would effectively wipe out their surplus cash, which meant that they would have to compromise on their living and lifestyle spend. And that would potentially mean that they might have a nice home, but they wouldn't be able to have the money to enjoy that whilst also having children as well. And especially when the children came along, that would make money really tight, which could have meant that really good investment property that they've just gone and bought the land and are building that property for, they may have had to sell that to actually get through. So all good for them for now, but not giving them a passive income into the future. So that was ultimately what they were looking for and what they discovered. So the solution that Paul came up with was a really, really clever one. And that was simply stay in your principal place of residence, okay, and we'll keep our personal debt lower. Okay, we'll finalise the build on the first investment property and get tenants into that property straight away. Now, before we have kids, but after we get married, we're going to buy one investment property before that time. So we get another one. So we're up to 2 investment properties before we actually start to build out the story around having a family and the maternity leave that we're going to also see come into that story. So that allowed us to try and make sure that we had the right price point that wasn't going to overextend them, but also be comfortable in that story. So their ultimate plan looks like this: home, an investment portfolio of 4 properties. So once they have the kids and they go old enough and the wife returns back to work, there's going to be more income and we'll buy 2 more properties. Their plan is to retire around that sort of 58 to 60 range on $2,000 a week or $104,000 in passive income over time. So for me, this is a really good example of what a lot of mum and dad households out there have to go through. They have to go through this thinking, this discovery session, what's possible for them based on their cash flows. And so for me, the transformation for them was they needed to compromise on some of their expectations. So the expectation to live closer in, when the property that they live in now and the area they live in now gives them a lot of what they needed, but wasn't necessarily closer in, they compromised on that. But the compromise on that has meant that they can go about in building out this investment portfolio. And a couple of important things in here. When they sat down to think about having the 2 children, the wife wanted to have a little bit more of extended time on maternity leave and also in part-time work, so she could enjoy the company of her children as opposed to just going straight back to work. So we've also accommodated that into the cash flows, into the numbers, and related that back to what was important to them. So, for me, these guys are on their pathway to achieving their financial security. So another great result for one of Paul's clients. So there's some great real life stories about how people are getting on with it. They're basically, yes, there's lots of numbers involved when you do these financial models and you build these plans, but they're real life stories. These are people who have ideas, decisions to make around their futures, and getting help with those ideas and those futures has meant they've got clarity and confidence to act in their story. So I'm really, really pleased to be sharing those stories. Now I want to focus in on the buyer's agency side. So all well and good, we've got our plan, but what did we do over the July month to get those people and other clients on their way to financial well-being? Well, in the buyer's agency side of the business, we bought 30 properties in July to the value of $19.6 million. So it was a busy month for our team in the buyer's agency side. And now I want to share a story from each of our buyer's agents around exactly the types of properties they bought, why they bought them, the negotiations, so you can get an understanding of what happens in our buyer's agency team from month to month. First up is Karen. Now, Karen's got a great story about a young Melbourne couple who are first-time investors. Now, what's interesting about their story is they've been doing the grind. They've been getting out there, they've been looking for an extended period of time, and they've been missing out, but they're time poor professionals. So it was getting to them in terms of not being able to secure a result. So they decided to engage a professional buyer's agent. In this case, obviously, it was Karen, and they engaged her to get the job done. Now, the brief is this. We had $1 million to $1.05 million in our budget, okay, and it was a growth strategy. And we wanted to make sure that we picked a property with owner-occupier appeal. So in that case, they wanted some period charm, and they also said, we're happy to add a bit of value later. So it didn't have to be fully renovated, completely set and forget property. So that was the brief. The result was we shopped in the inner north of Melbourne and we found a great location with great street appeal. And one of those streets that have got all of those period properties lined up row after row. So that's a great story. In terms of walking distance to everything, single fronted, freestanding property, with good bones, good sized land. So land on each side, not too tight in terms of what it was. Now, the strategy for getting this property was it was bought pre-auction. So what happened there was it was early in the campaign. And because our clients were ready to go, we were able to act really quickly. So we acted quickly, we put an offer in before everyone else could get their stuff together, and we were able to secure that property for the 900s. So we even got under budget. So if they wanted to do some tidy up on it, but from my understanding, it's a neat and tidy property. So there's not much to do other than get those renters in there and then start thinking about how you might improve that property later on. So I think this is a great outcome because what Karen was able to do was show her expertise. I mean, all Karen does is buy property, just like every one of our buyer's agents. That's what they do week in, week out in terms of looking. So they were able to, one, get quick into the market for this particular couple. We got that property within 2 weeks of them engaging us, and that's because we were able to jump onto the market. Now, for the clients, what's helped them, and this is what I love about this story, is that no more weekends. No more weeknights trying to get their inspection list together to go out on a Saturday or maybe on a Thursday night. So where is this couple right now as I'm recording this? They're in Europe. I understand that they're actually in Italy taking a holiday, and we're doing all the prep work leading up to the settlement of the property. So what better outcome can you want for clients who can get on with their life and know that they've got their first investment property in the bank and hopefully looking for more into the future. So after Karen, I've got a story here from Jake, who's been very busy in the month of July, but here's one of the great little stories for one of his clients. So the brief or the client was single female professional based out of Melbourne, who's also a property wealth planning client of ours. So that's also important to note. So the brief he had was a budget around $1 million. The strategy was a growth asset, so we needed to find a nice growth asset around that $1 million. $1 million is going to get you a really nice owner-occupier appeal period property. So that was our brief. So we were going into Melbourne. Now the result was we found an off-market property, okay, in the inner west of Melbourne that was an asking price of $1.1 million from an outside area agent. Now, once Jake understood that he was dealing with an outside area agent, he knew that not necessarily were they going to be able to do a strong marketing campaign in that area, especially when it was off market. But he also knew that the asking price was far too high. 1.1 million, they were out of the market. So they must have said to the vendor who was selling the property, yep, list it with us, we'll be able to get the best price. But Jake, he knows his market, he knows his valuations. He was able to say, no way known is it worth 1.1 million. And so we were able to negotiate that property for mid to high 900s. So that was a great result for that particular client. Now, what I love about this from an outcome point of view is, this particular single professional female has said, if it is to be, it's up to me. Okay, so she's said, for whatever reason, she's moving forward with her own plan. So she's now able to take that big first step in financially securing her future with this purchase. So a great result for Jake and for his client out of Melbourne. So well done, Jake. So Krista's story this month comes from an international based client. In fact, it's actually a repeat client of ours, but they are internationally based and they also had the logistic challenges of being obviously able to buy here in Australia. So what was the brief? This investment property was about planning for the children, okay? So they were looking to give the kids an opportunity. So this one came out of our financial planning team, and it's being bought in an investment company to be able to look after the family moving forward. So the brief was we had up to $500,000, but we wanted to make sure that this one could help pay for itself a little bit. So a little bit more focus in on the yield story. So we've got a bit more of a balanced asset where we're going to balance out the growth and the yield for this particular client. So the idea was we're going to shop in Brisbane. So we looked for an emerging area of Brisbane we thought was, going to have that ripple effect in terms of growth. And Krista bought a cracker. She bought a Queenslander, a high set, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car on 600-metre block. So a lovely big size block. And guess what? It was under competition. But because our buyer was a cash offer, she was able to quickly push away a lot of that competition. And this is where it gets interesting in terms of the negotiation that Krista did for this particular client. The actual listing agent was away. So she contacted one of the other agents inside the real estate agency. And she said to them, let's get this deal done. Now what that means for that other agent, she actually quite liked that idea, because if she brought the buyer to the table, she would be able to share in some of the commission on the seller's side. So Krista was able to quickly negotiate with that agent whilst the listing agent was away, secure the contract by 4 p.m. that day, property off market. So we've bought that property, and in Krista's eyes, she valued that property around $5,000 to $15,000 more than which we actually had to pay for it. So that is a great outcome for that client. Now, what does that mean? Obviously for these repeat clients of ours, the reality is they've now got that property inside that investment vehicle that's going to help look after their kids. So they're one step closer in being able to build out that wealth base and that legacy that they're planning for their children. So good on them, and good result there for Krista. So now we move on to Matt, and he had a really smart couple out of Sydney in their late 20s who again are really thinking about their futures, and they were rent investors. So they were looking for their first investment property, and they were also property wealth planning clients as well. Now for their particular situation, they hadn't moved as quick as they wanted to, and one of them is actually in the army, posted currently in Afghanistan. So good on them for obviously doing that great work for our country, but they're also getting on with their job of looking after their own backyard. So the brief was 700 to 750, and they were looking for Melbourne. So that's a bit of a tough brief, because normally around that price point, you're not going to get big bang for your buck closer in. You need to look at either townhouses or moving a little bit wider. So it is a difficult brief because it's a growth asset brief. So that's important to note. So Matt got a great result here, and how he got this great result is he opened his eyes, he lifted his eyes, saw the research and went down into the extended Bayside area there, and he bought into a beachside area where the land is sort of landlocked. So all the land's been fully utilised, but it was a high income pocket down the extended area of the eastern suburbs in Melbourne. Now he was able to buy a brick home, 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 2-car on a full size block, and he bought it below market value. Now I don't like that statement very often. I don't like to say, how do you buy below market value? I mean, ultimately the market is the market. But the backstory here is why he was able to do that. He originally identified this property, rang the agent, and the agent said, no, we're asking more for it. So he moved on. But then the agent worked out that the agent did a silly mistake, and he put the campaign too high on this property. So he circled back once he worked out it hadn't been sold, and the vendors had actually committed somewhere else. So they needed to get a quick sale away, else they were going to lose their deposit on the home that they'd bought. So Matt was able to take advantage of what was a very poorly marketed property. The campaign was botched by the selling agent, and he was able to negotiate a fast sale price which was in the best interest of his client. So well done, Matt. Now for that couple, well, obviously one of them still in the army in Afghanistan, but they can start to think about how they're going to get on with their life, knowing that they've got that first investment property into their portfolio. So a great result for that couple. So Nicole had a repeat client and a bit of a challenging brief, but the client basically is professional services. They're based in regional Victoria, and the brief was this. It was a hybrid brief. Now, what we mean by hybrid is that we're going to start it off as an investment property, but then we're going to turn it into an owner-occupied later. And this particular property had to be bought in Adelaide. So the brief was between 1 to 1.1 million. So that's going to get you a good bit of property in Adelaide for that particular price point. But we wanted to get some capital growth in there as well. So we needed to find, or Nicole needed to find, a brilliant location. And what she found is one of the best beachside suburbs in Adelaide, very high profile with high status. Now the property she located was only 600 metres from the beach, so a couple of streets back from the beach. And what was interesting about this hybrid brief is, when you're doing something that they're going to retire into for this particular couple, being beachside, they're going to need to have car access and maybe boat access, and that's what they got. So this one had dual street access for up to 4 cars. So hence the boat was going to make an appearance in this car garage at some point in time as well. Now the current property was neat and tidy, 3 bedroom, 3 bath, 2 living zones, and will rent well in its current work. So no need to do any renovation to it. But because we had a budget of $1 million to 1.1, let's think about how this rolls out. So the acquisition strategy was it went to auction. So we had to compete at auction. Now it was passed into Nicole and the reserve was $1,010,000. Now we weren't going to pay that reserve. So Nicole was able to negotiate and buy in the late 9s. Now what does that mean for the customer? Well, it's meant that we've still got a little bit of money in reserve there. So we've got enough money to potentially renovate that property when the time comes that we're going to move into that property. So right now, neat and tidy, set and forget, we can rent that out comfortably throughout the course of the next few years before we move to retire there. So I like the idea that there's still money in the bank for the renovations. The location is unbelievable. So it's always going to, remember the location does 80% of the heavy lifting when it comes into that. The clients who are repeat clients that we've bought investment properties before, peace of mind, they've got a solid investment right now, they've got something to get excited about when they move for their retirement. And I quite like this idea that the wife who's originally from Adelaide is going to be able to know that they are eventually going to move to this beautiful beachside area after being living in what is in Victoria a pretty dry and hot location. So she's going to have a bit of water to enjoy. So I think from that point of view, that tells the real story there. We're a difficult hybrid brief, but I think we got a great result for that particular client. So well done, Nicole. So Ashley's brief was a Sydney couple and they were a professional IT couple. Now, they were property wealth planning clients as well. So they'd done all of their planning work and it was Ashley's job to find them a great property. Now the backstory for this couple is interesting because I had the privilege of actually meeting them. They came down to our offices here in Melbourne and I got a chance to say g'day to them. They're podcast listeners and they also have been heavily watching our how-to videos, and that has given them the confidence to actually move forward, because what I found out from this lovely couple was that they were in a position to buy a property back in 2013. But procrastination and confidence, their lack thereof, stopped them from taking action. So they went away and they got themselves educated a bit further by listening to the podcast and also watching those how-to videos. And so that is what led them to getting a plan, and now we're implementing on that plan with this very first investment purchase. So the brief was 800 to 850 growth asset. So we went shopping in Melbourne and we located a great property in the northern middle ring of Melbourne. Okay, freestanding, renovated brick home, 3 bedroom, 1 bath, 1 car, in a great location to everything, and a good size block for the area. So this particular location I know very well, and I know that you can walk to all of the main amenity around this area. So certainly a great property. Now we bought it under auction conditions. So there was obviously competition on the day. There was another buyer's agent on the property. So Ashley just happened to know the auctioneer because Ashley has previously been in real estate on the selling side before. So he obviously was able to have a good communication during the auction process. And that led to obviously a good outcome for our particular client because, in terms of understanding that relationship, Ash was able to convince also the other potential bidders there on the day that this was an inside running game, when in fact it wasn't. We were there just like everyone else to potentially buy that property. So a great result, and Ashley was able to strike and get that property inside budget through strong bidding, and he won it under the hammer. Now, additionally to that, we're also clever enough to make sure that we negotiated early access to that property. So now we can start to get pictures taken on the property and get that property listed for rent. So by the time that property comes to settlement, I think in early September, we're going to be in a position to hopefully have tenants ready to go into that property. Now, again, in being able to speak to this particular couple, they were so pleased to be able to have a professional who can help them, guide them through the process. They were still nervous through the process. There was no doubt about that. And that's what I learned. So when they didn't know what Ashley was talking about, or they needed to get some further resources, they would go back to the how-to videos or go back to the podcasts and actually listen to what they were talking about. In fact, Ali gave a great point. So Ali's is the gentleman's name. He actually gave me a great point to share with everyone. He said, go back to those first 15 podcasts, because that's where I found a lot of the explanation to try and fully comprehend what Ashley was saying about what our next move is or why we're doing what we're doing at that moment. So they were a delighted couple, very, very happy. In fact, our plan was to buy them another property inside the next 18 months, but they're actually thinking now that they can move quicker on that second property because their confidence has gone from nervous to more confident now. And so we know that once they get more confidence, we know their cash flow position will allow. Remember, they could have bought that first property in 2013. There's no more delaying, there's no more procrastination. So now they're starting to think about moving that second investment property forward. So great result, Ashley. Congratulations to you guys out of Sydney. It's a really, really great story for you, and I'm pleased that you've been able to take that leap of faith in terms of getting into the property market. So there we have it. A nice little wrap up for the July month. Lots of activity happening. 40 plans being delivered, so lots of new clients coming through. Obviously a lot of clients that we need to be buying properties for. We bought properties last month in Melbourne, regional Victoria, Brisbane, southeast Queensland, also in Adelaide as well. So a very, very busy time for both our property wealth planning clients, but also our buyers agents. Now that being said, if you're interested in learning more about becoming a client of ours, please feel free to have a free initial consultation with us. No obligation to learn more about what we can offer you if you want to get some property advice or if you want us to buy a great investment property for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll look forward to catching up with you next month.